We are going to welcome in the Seattle City Councilwoman, Kshama Sawant. Hello. Thank you so much for joining us.
Hi.
Thank you so much for having me.
You're so busy, not only fighting the good fight, but fighting against the bad recall. So can you just tell people what you are in the midst of?
Yes, as you were mentioning earlier, Katie, my office is facing a recall campaign from the right wing and from Seattle's big business. And on the face of it, the charges are about my office's role in the Black Lives Matter movement. And factually speaking, every charge is a false charge. But what it really represents, what is this recall really about? Is that they are absolutely infuriated at the phenomenal impact that my office and the movements that we have helped lead, the socialist impact that we've had winning the country's first major city $15 minimum wage. Last year, the Amazon tax, the ban on chemical weapons and other crowd control weapons, the first in the nation kind of ban. And they couldn't defeat us in the elections in 2019. And, in 2019, we won our second re-election or our third election. And so what the ruling class, what the right wing, what big business, and actually what the Democratic establishment of Seattle are angry about is not that we don't keep our promises. They are angry precisely because we might be virtually the only elected office really in the entire United States, which actually keeps our promises. But not only in name, we use our office as a platform for building mass movements to win those victories, because we know that as a lone socialist in elected office, as an independent fighting against a democratic establishment, you cannot make this a contest of one individual's morals or backbone against this entire establishment. Mm-hmm. You have to use your office to build social movements, mass movements, because those mass movements, independent of the establishment, are the only strength you have to overturn this otherwise ruthless status quo of balance of forces. And that's what we have done. We have won victories. We have empowered ordinary people. And the example of what we have done has been contagious. And that is exactly what the ruling class fears, that example of what can be done, how working people can get organized in solidarity and fight back. And that is why they are going after my office. But I am hardly the first person they're going after. I won't be the last. And that is why it's so incredibly important you're covering this issue on your show, because the left in the entire United States should join us in defeating this recall.
Can you just talk about who the last person who was recalled was?
Yes, actually, when I was first elected in 2013, November, it was about a century after the last socialist was elected in Seattle, and that was for the school board. It was a woman named Anna Louise Strong. And in fact, she also faced a recall campaign, and unfortunately, she did end up getting recalled, and that was during the First World War. And she got recalled because of being outspoken about her opposition to the war, and also for her open support of the Wobblies, the workers. Exactly.
Yeah. What is the name for International Workers of the World, right?
IWW. Yeah, Workers of the World, who were also courageously opposing the First World War. And if you'll remember, it was that same year that Eugene Debs, the most important socialist of American history, who was also charged with sedition for his speech against the war. And he was sentenced to 10 years in prison, and that sentence was upheld by the U.S. Supreme Court. And that is a reminder for us that the courts are not on our side. The police are not on the side of movements. You just showed this horrifying footage from Tacoma. And so while we await the ruling from the Supreme Court of Washington State, we are in no way basing our faith on the court system of capitalism. And that is why we have launched a really vibrant and important solidarity campaign against this recall that everybody who's watching this needs to get involved in with us. And I would also say that, we are not in a defensive posture. It is absolutely critical that we take this recall campaign against us seriously. But the best way of fighting, as you know, the best defense is to go on the offensive. And that's why we are fighting to extend the eviction moratorium here by a whole year. We are fighting to have guaranteed legal counsel for renters facing eviction, because we know renter debt and the coming evictions are a tsunami in the making. We're also fighting for comprehensive COVID relief by increasing the Amazon tax that we just won.
And so I just want to make sure, it's solidarity.us.org?
They can find the information about our solidarity campaign against the recall can be found at kshamasolidarity.org. So that's my first name, KSHAMA solidarity.org.
Okay. Can you talk about the gains that you've managed to achieve? I mean, they're pretty stunning, especially because I think that a lot of people think of local politics as not very sexy or interesting or exciting, but you guys have managed to do a lot. Can you just talk about some of those victories?
Absolutely. Well, as I said, when we ran in 2013 and when we won, we ran our campaign with a concrete political and economic demands that energized working people, without which we wouldn't have won. So, for the left and for the socialist movement in the United States, I think that's a really important example that our election campaigns themselves have to be vehicles to energize people into a movement around concrete demands. And we ran on $15 an hour, taxing the wealthy and big business, and for rent control in Seattle because rents are through the stratosphere. And then when we won, I just wanted to share the story, that when we won the election and I took office, in the first couple of weeks in January of 2014, a couple of the corporate Democratic Council members, and I'll just share with everybody on your show, there isn't a Republican force, so to say, in Seattle City Hall. There are 8 Democrats and I'm one socialist. So it's always been that way for the whole 7.5 years that I've been in office. And so in my first couple of weeks in office, 2 of the corporate Democratic Council members came into my office, sat me down, and privately warned me that even though I had rabble-roused my way into office, I was not going to win any minimum wage increase, much less $15 an hour. And they kindly informed me that City Hall ran on their terms. By June of that year, we had won the unanimous and historic city council vote, including those 2 council members who are actually anti-worker and pro-big business, who voted yes because of the tremendous pressure we had generated by using my office to launch the 15 Now campaign. That is the approach that Socialist Alternative, my organization, political organization, has taken for all our campaigns. We don't make it about an individual or one organization. We use everything we've got to help launch these bigger movements. And so we launched the 15 Now campaign alongside progressive labor unions, other socialists, other rank and file Democrats, all of which overcame not only the vicious opposition of big business and corporate Democrats, but it's important to mention it also overcame the cautious instincts of some of the labor leaders reluctant to openly clash with the establishment. And it is with that kind of clash that we won also the Amazon tax last summer, which raises $214 million by taxing the largest corporations like Amazon to fund social housing and Green New Deal programs. We have won a whole series of renters' rights victories, including, again, the only kind in the nation, a ban on winter evictions.
Wow. So you were able to galvanize popular, I guess, mass movements against your colleagues who warned you against doing that, right? So they wound up voting with you against the position that they claimed that they were going to have. How were you able to do that? I mean, and I know it's not about one individual, but how did that happen?
Well, I would say the fact that fundamentally the approach that we have used from day one, when we launched our campaign for city council in the early months of 2013, we were very clear. And when I say we, I mean Socialist Alternative and I, that if we are going to run a campaign, it has to be with the very clear understanding that the only way you can fight back, let alone win, against this massive political establishment that stands that represents the interest of Wall Street and you represent the interest of ordinary people. The only way you can change this, as I said before, ruthless balance of power is if you have a movement that empowers you, because otherwise, what do you have? Otherwise, your only options are staying true to your principles, but getting completely marginalized and winning nothing, and really more importantly than that, energizing no movements at all for further victories, or you end up selling out. Those are your options unless you empower yourself with a movement around you. That's the blanket you have to wrap yourself with, because that is the only thing that works. And that is the approach we have used from day one. And I think it's also important to talk about what kind of movements. When I say independent mass movements, I don't use the word independent lightly. It means movements that are independent of the political establishment, that do not rely on so-called progressive Democrats who say the right things but then often betray ordinary people, and movements that are democratically organized within themselves, so that all the movement leaders, even those who don't have elected positions, all the people who rise up as leaders of the movement, can also be held accountable to the interests of the rank and file. So just to give you an example, when we launched the Tax Amazon campaign in January of last year, we absolutely insisted, Socialist Alternative absolutely insisted, alongside some of the very wonderful left unions, that we need a leadership of the movement that is thoroughly accountable to the hundreds, thousands of people who were fighting alongside us. And so to that end, rather than taking decisions among few leading activists in a closed room, we ended up making everything transparent, and we held 3-4 mass action conferences with hundreds attending, and actually having democratic discussion and debate at those action conferences on the key elements, both of the policy itself, but also of the political strategy. How are we going to win this? How are we actually going to put pressure on a democratic dominated council? So all of that was openly discussed and debated in the movement, and votes were taken democratically. And that's what empowered our movement. And last but not least, I'll say, having Socialist Alternative as my own organization, an organization that is itself accountable to ordinary people, to the movement that we are rooted in, and that is itself internally democratically organized, has also been decisive in enabling me to take on the pressure of conflict. And it is daily, relentless pressure. And without your own political organization that can become the backbone of your own morale and your ability to build movements, this can't be done. And that's why I would say it's urgent that our movements nationally take seriously the need to build our own party, a party by and for the working class.
This is a question from Who Burns, Get 'em Sawant. But on a side note, why is it always the right wing doing these recalls rather than lefties recalling corporate hacks? And related to that also, can you just explain who is behind, even though you have your corporate Dem enemies, can you explain who is really behind the recall effort?
Yes, absolutely. And I think that the question raises a very important point about how when we talk about accountability, for example, I just mentioned the question of a new party for the working class and for the oppressed of America. Certainly in such a party, and definitely I can tell you we follow this principle inside Socialist Alternative, we want such a new party to be democratically organized and be accountable to rank and file members. I mean, if you're a Democrat, when was the last time you were invited by Nancy Pelosi for a membership meeting where you could take a vote on any issue of substance? I mean,
I voted on the ice cream. She let me go through her freezer and asked me what's my favorite.
Sorry, I stand corrected. Yeah. So the right to recall representatives who betray the interests of the ordinary people and members of the working class party has to be a core component. And we, as I said, we certainly believe in that in Socialist Alternative, and that is necessary to keep our representatives accountable, because our representatives will come under intense pressure. And I can testify to that from personal experience. And so, that's an interesting point that, while we need to fight for a party that will actually allow rank and file to hold members accountable, on the other hand, the kind of recall we are facing is absolutely not that kind of recall. It's actually a recall campaign with, as I said, trumped up charges that is being motivated by the right wing, by big business. And I will say it is not just the right wing. It's, and by the way, just on the right wing, I'll mention, you asked me who is behind it. I'll tell you one example is Martin Seelig, who is a billionaire. One of the buildings, for example, he owns is in Seattle downtown, which ICE rents from him. And
Wow.
And he's one of the maxed out Trump supporters. I think he donated big for Donald Trump in 2016 16. I think he must have donated this year as well. And there are other corporate real estate interests behind this campaign. But I should also say, if you don't mind, just for a couple of minutes,
Of course.
I think it's important to understand also that who's behind, whether somebody is actually behind this recall has to be examined also by understanding who really wants us out. And I think that includes the Democratic establishment as a whole. And it's important to see what happened in the election in 2019. And as some of you may know, actually, in the primary elections of 2019, not only did we have a chamber, U.S. Chamber of Commerce backed candidate. So obviously he was the Amazon candidate whom we ended up defeating in the general election. But in the primary election, we had another candidate who was running who had been put forward by the Latina and self-professed progressive Democrats on the city council who are currently serving with me. And they went around the media telling stories to the media saying, I agree with everything Shama stands for. I just don't like her. And so we're going to have this nice progressive who's going to be nice. And I think we have to, first of all, we have to reject these personalized attacks, these falsified personalized attacks. We cannot be coy about rejecting them. But it's also important to note that this kind of fake respectability politics, when they're not, they're hardly being respectable to me. Right. But the point is that this is not a personal question. When they use respectability politics, it's a weapon against left politics because what they are actually trying to discourage you from doing and what they're criticizing you for is for being fearless in pushing back against the establishment and calling out their own betrayals. And this is where I think the rubber hits the road, is that it's easy to identify right-wing politicians and obviously pro-corporate politicians like Nancy Pelosi. But it is also important to understand that as long as we have progressive politicians who are not actually willing to risk their careers to fight for us, there is no change happening. And so we have to reject that kind of sort of two-facedness as well. However well-meaning a politician might be, it's of no use if they're not going to fight for you.
Yeah, it's a weaponization of respectability politics and also civility politics. And we see this a lot. People getting offended. How dare you say that about this person? Friend of the show, Brianna Joy Gray, who was Bernie's press secretary, tweeted once when I think it was Kamala Harris said something about how people need free treatment for COVID for everyone or vaccine for everyone. And Bree tweeted something like that. What about diabetes and cancer? Her point was like, we need Medicare for all, not just in the cases of a global pandemic. And people were like, how dare you? Kamala's mother died of cancer. And it's like, really? That's what,
Good
first
Lord.
of all, that's not what it was
She
about.
should care more. She should care more.
Yeah, exactly. Then you're welcome for raising awareness about this stuff. But yeah, that is really dangerous. And so is there anyone who has been, feel free to call people out. Anyone you want to call out or call in or urge to support you, or do you want to thank anyone who has supported you?
Well, I think, first of all, I would say what's incredible is the incredible support and solidarity we are getting from ordinary people, from union members. Just yesterday, we had a major fundraiser for the Shama Solidarity Campaign with labor union members. And we're getting support from not only in our district, in District 3, where our seat exists, but also from the left and from socialists around the nation. We've received endorsements from Chris Hedges, from Noam Chomsky, from Julia Salazar, who's a DSA elected candidate in New York. I think these are very, very important points of support. And what's notable is the deafening silence of the Democratic council members on the Seattle City Council itself.
Yeah. We should put up some pictures or tell us their names. We'll put them on the screen and call them
Actually,
out.
Can I just say, just in the last few days, I mean, we've obviously had this recall targeted against us, but in the last few days, my office has also received death threats from very specific death threats. And unfortunately, these seem to be coming from the email account of a Seattle firefighter, City of Seattle firefighter.
Wow.
And so I just meant to say,